Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm on today with Steve. He goes by Diplomat655. Link to his Twitter will be in the description below. And we're here to talk about, at least to begin, can someone love science and God at the same time? So, Steve, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, before I begin, I'm
Okay.
happy. I'm happy that we got a chance to speak today, Jackson. I watched you debate with Kent Hovind, who I like Kent Hovind, but I thought you did an excellent job. And no, seriously, I watched the debate. To be honest, I was rooting for Kent. I'll be honest with you. I was thinking, come on, go Kent, but you did an excellent job. And you're clearly like a very intelligent guy, and I've watched you on Twitter for a while, and me and Peter have spoken about you for a while. So it's an honor. I'm very happy to get a chance to speak with you.
Well, I guess my reputation precedes me then. I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, it's not a bad thing to do when you have people who are probably twice your age and they're all learning from you. So that's a huge compliment.
Peter's a good friend. I like him a lot.
Yeah, me too.
He's helped me quite a bit out on YouTube videos and getting everything done, and he helped me moderate a debate between R and Ra and Mr. Intelligent Design.
Yes.
Yeah, you caught that?
I caught that, yeah. It was interesting, let's say. Yeah, very interesting.
Very true. Interesting is the word I would use as well.
Yeah, it sure was.
But yeah, he's helped me quite a lot. And so a big shout out to Peter.
Yes, to my friend also. Me and Peter have more tussles on Twitter and YouTube, but we get along fine. We can always have a good fight and then shake hands at the end of it and enjoy it. So yeah, shout out to him. Good.
Yeah,
so
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say. So I thought, as a topic, just to start us, the reason why I chose that was I'm guilty of the same thing. What happens sometimes? I get on Twitter. My aim is always clear. I'm a Christian. I love God. My aim is to promote and talk about God. But I do end up always getting into conversations with. It always seems to end up with science and religion. And some of the conversation that I follow with different people always seems to end up in science and religion. So I thought it might be an interesting question to start us off to say, it's almost, are they mutually exclusive, or can you love God and love science? So I didn't know what your thoughts were on that.
Well, for my thoughts, I would say absolutely. Anyone can absolutely love God and science at the same time. And I would cite Francis Collins, Robert Bacher, Mary Schweitzer, as well as a host of scientists throughout the ages. I mean, even today, when there are obviously lots of non-religious scientists, there are still lots of religious scientists as well, and I happen to know some. So yeah, absolutely no problem, I would think, between loving science and loving God.
Yeah, see, I don't see the clash too, but I know on on Twitter and on various debates that I've had, I'm also very guilty of it. I listened to a talk, one of Peter's videos, with, I can never say her name, Caris. And they was talking about sometimes we get into the them and us. And I'm also guilty of that. Sometimes I go them and us. As soon as I hear the word evolution, it's almost evolution equals atheism. And I'm realizing that's not always the case.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes it can be a case that people can be fully for evolution, also love God, or they can be creation. They can be love God, but also be theistic evolutionists, as they call them. And I didn't know how you saw the difference between those. I know you say like you think you can do both. Do you see any clashes, or how do you see the debates when you watch them on Twitter and on YouTube, and how do you see them?
It depends what you mean by clash. Taking Francis Collins, for instance, he's an example of an evolutionary biologist. Well, he's a geneticist who clearly loves God, clearly goes to church. He was a born-again evangelical. But at the same time, it's a matter of compartmentalization. His love for God kind of stops at the lab door, which is what I've seen advocated by a lot of people who say, a lot of the people who go out and say, you can of course love God and science at the same time. You just kind of have to leave your religion at the door, because we don't bring religion or non-religion into science.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of science.
Yeah, and how do you see it in the field? Because you're in the field. How does it tend to work? Obviously, I don't have access to that kind of a field.
It's not brought up really. We don't talk about if you were to go to, university, and you would ask professor about science, there would be no God involved. Of course, there wouldn't be lack of God necessarily either. It would just be, this is what we know from the data. This is just what we observe. This is what we can test. This is what we can infer from the data. And so the question of God's existence never comes up, as far as far as testing is concerned.
Yeah, and how do you see? Because I'm not sure, Jackson, with you. I know obviously you're as far as the evolution side, you're super switched on with that. How are you? I don't know. I've never actually read. Are you atheist, Christian? I don't know. I genuinely don't know the answer to that question.
I'm an atheist, yes, an agnostic atheist, yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't have any problem with Christian scientist or Muslim scientist or Hindu scientist or what have you.
Yeah.
A scientist. Sorry,
Jackson. No, go on. You carry on. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, a scientist is a scientist as long as you can use the scientific method correctly. You follow the data to its conclusion, etc. Things like that.
Yeah, I would say so. And I think from I've made a mistake in the past, which is I've almost assumed that to be somebody who believes in that God created the earth, it's almost it seems some of the things I say sounds like it's against science, but that's not what I mean. I think people can believe in evolution and still be Christians. I think people can believe in creation, but could somebody believe in creation and still be a scientist?
I would say that's generally a matter of compartmentalization. There are guys who are the theistic evolutionists who try to make the evolutionary account and the creation account kind of come together. Like they say, oh, day one was the first 10 or 5 billion years of the universe's existence.
Yes,
day two is that kind of stuff. If they want to look at it that way, okay. It's their prerogative. I don't look at it that way. I try to leave religion, no matter what kind of religion, out of it. I just try to look at it from the scientific perspective.
Yeah, just look at the data. And then when it comes to the science, is it biology, which is your particular field?
Yeah, it's biology. I'm going to eventually get into zoology, or evolutionary biology.
Well, I'm sure with your brain it's not going to be a problem. Seriously, you have I don't know how many hours per day you study, but you have sorry, let me turn the phone off. But you have an ability to retain data that's unusual, a gift, as we would say as Christians.
I wish I could retain organic chemistry more. That stuff kicks my butt. Chemistry has always kicked my butt. It's the organic side of, the inorganic side of science that is my enemy.
Yeah, and then because you're clearly from the United States.
Yes, sir. Born and raised.
Born and raised. And me and Peter have had a few different chats online, and clearly things over there, religion-wise, are different than over here in UK. I don't know. Are you down Bible Belt, or are you?
I'm in the heart of it. Yes, I live in Louisiana. I was raised in Shreveport. Just recently came to last year came to Baton Rouge for LSU. So, but yep, been here in the Bible Belt my whole life. And so the high religiosity is something I expect, I guess you would say, at this point in my life. But I know there are places, so they tell me, up north where it's less religious. So they tell me.
You've not found it yet, but it is there somewhere, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead.
Jackson. And was you raised as a with religion, or was you raised without religion?
I was raised Christian, Methodist, and my maternal family is very, very highly religious. My grandmother actually sent me a whole bunch of books on apologetics, all of which I've read. She sent me a book. The first book was from 1969, I think.
Wow.
And it was titled "Did Man Get Here by Evolution or by Creation?" There was also Evidence That Demands a Verdict, which is by Josh McDowell. It's a fairly popular
Yes, I've heard
apologetics
this one,
book.
Yeah. God bless the grandmothers, by the way. God bless the grandmothers. They're strong in their the faith, whatever they believe in. They're strong in the faith. They don't mind to push it. So my grandmother was old time, what I would call like an old time Christian. She was Christian from the day she was born to the day she died. She would be going around the house singing hymns and constantly quoting the Bible. And at the time, she used to annoy me like crazy with it. But now she's died, I miss her for it. So God bless the grandmothers.
Yeah. Understandable. Yeah. It was very interesting. My grandmother actually, at one point, got me to speak to the pastor at her church. A very nice man. And so I talked to him for about 3 hours.
Yeah.
And then we, went separate ways.
Yeah. And did you ever truly believe, or just was you obviously you're raised in a Christian home, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you buy into it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I've thought about more recently, because I was not vocal about atheism for quite a while. I became an atheist when I was 11, but I was not vocal about it for kind of fear, I guess, sort of fear. But I think I do believe I did. I do believe that when I was a Christian, I believed in God because it was very painful the night that I stopped being Christian. It was very painful.
Would you mind me asking what happened? Would you mind me asking what happened? I'm only curious because you said the night, so I didn't know whether there was something like one particular thing for you.
Well, it wasn't like a family tragedy or anything. I had been exposed, probably by accident, to the fact that there were people who didn't believe in God, and I started doing research about this, reading articles, watching videos, and started realizing, okay, maybe these guys have a point.
Yeah.
And so that was around 11 years old. And so one night I prayed for a sign from God. Like my girlfriend and I watched Bruce Almighty last night. It's kind of like the scene where he's like, "Come on, God, send me a sign. Come on."
Yeah.
And so I was in my room, praying that I would see a sign, and there was nothing. It was just utter silence in the room, utter darkness. And so that was pretty much it. I abandoned the faith totally after that. And so that was how old am I? 19. So that was 8 years ago.
Yeah.
I'd ask Savannah how old I am.
Now wait till you get to 47. I wish I could forget my age now. So
it's not something that comes up a lot, I think. So it just
yeah. And then I'm just curious because, like you say, it's very different over there. I live in Manchester, England. I'm pretty much the opposite direction. So for me to be a Christian amongst my friends, it's almost the opposite way around. So a lot of my friends think I'm a freak for being a Christian. And
we'll come down south.
They just basically think I'm a strange, weird guy for talking about Jesus all the time. So, but it's the opposite. I understand it's very the opposite way around where you live.
All the time. Yep. You can't. You go outside. You travel down like any interstate. You'll see the signs like is it one of the lawyers? He has a sign that says like "Blessed are those who mourn." Or you'll see the signs for what is it, 1-800-4-TRUTH or something like that. There's several of those I've seen around Shreveport and Bossier.
Yeah.
And Texas. Yeah, I actually called them. I called them once. Pretty nice guy who was the on the line there. So
Did you give him a hard time, or was you kind to him?
I'd say I was pretty kind to him. That's what I think. um, we, yeah, we were talking mostly about abiogenesis, which in my mind is a mistake or was a mistake. But yeah, he was a nice guy. There's also at LSU. This is probably true for universities in general. We have religious groups who come around all the time, and are trying to get converts. They're usually the LDS is out there, and those guys are always nice. They're super tall, which is funny.
What's the LDS? I'm not sure what they are.
The Mormons, Church of Latter-day Saints.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're always, even though they're usually younger than me, they're always very tall. I don't know. Maybe I'm just really short.
I was gonna say maybe there's something strange there. I don't know the side of the side of that. You see, over here now with evangelism, it's you would very rarely see anybody. You've got crazy guys like me who will go out and just talk about Jesus, but it's very rare you would go and see somebody on the street or even handing out leaflets and flyers, and you certainly wouldn't see anybody knocking on the door.
Mm-hmm.
We have Jehovah's Witnesses here. They're the only ones that do this.
Yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses.
You have those there as well? You have the same?
Yeah, they're here. There's a group of little old ladies who are Jehovah's Witnesses who sit out in the Union. They only came to my house once, and I didn't even actually talk to them. So
yeah,
I don't know. They just weren't active in my area, I guess.
No,
also in the chat we have Beej says an expat Yorkshire girl says hi.
Hi. Yeah, for a Yorkshire girl. Hello to the Yorkshire girl. Yes. We're almost neighbours.
But
almost neighbours, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a group from Mississippi who comes out to LSU called Consuming Fire. It's a cult.
Yeah.
And they yell at people, and their head is someone I get into frequent tussles with.
Right.
Yeah, Facebook and in front of the Union which is the main central building on campus. And so yeah, he comes out there with his, or he usually goes out there with this group, and they're Pentecostals. So there's the whole family. They have kids ranging in age from like the very young, like maybe 5 or 6 years old, little kids up to 40s or so. And so yeah, it's just a whole bunch of them. A lot of people, and they they got the whole God hate gays sign, or God hates gays sign and stuff like that.
Yeah, I've seen these groups, some of these groups on YouTube, and I don't know. I can't see the thinking behind what they're doing. To be honest, from my, I'm a Christian, but from my side, if you start standing in the street screaming at people, telling them that God hates them, I don't think that's I don't know. Maybe just me, but I don't think that's the way to bring people to Christ.
Yeah, we actually met a guy. Savannah and I met a guy just the other day who was standing there on the side. He wasn't yelling at anyone, but we were leaving the Union, and we saw him there, and he was free. So we went over and talked to him, and I'd forgotten him, but evidently I had talked to him before because he recognized me. Don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And we talked to him for a little bit, and so at the end of it, he said, I'm gonna have to ask you to move along so I can proselytize more. And we said okay, and so I reached out to shake his hand, and he said, "I'm not going to shake your hand, sir." And we said okay, and we left right after he threatened us with eternal torment. He wouldn't even shake my hand. So,
that's well, like you say, like atheists and Christians, there's good and bad for all of us. It's I watched one guy on YouTube, and he was screaming at people and calling them every name you could possibly believe. And I actually tried to find him and send him a message, but it ended up on, I think it was a YouTube video. It was a few years ago now, and another Christian came to challenge him because he was screaming and shouting, and then he basically put down the Christian as if she was a heathen and she was also going to burn in hell. So I have a sense of the kind of things that you see. We don't tend to see it here, but who knows? Let's see. As an atheist, what kind of things, if you don't mind me asking, I'm just curious because I'm starting interacting now with a lot of people who are atheists, and Peter's been a good friend to me. We've had lots of different chats, and some people, like you said, agnostic, some people atheists. There's different sides of it. As a Christian, trying to communicate with atheists, obviously we have a passion for what we believe in, and we do want to talk about the gospel. What's the best way we should do that?
Well, from my perspective, as someone who has heard the Christian meta-narrative and knows what the Gospels say, whenever I talk to apologists on the out in front of the union, I have to remember that this is the first time they're talking to me, even though I know what they're going to say. This is the first time for them saying it to me, so it's different. You know, you kind of have to be aware of that. But for the majority of people who would claim to be atheists, because atheist is such a fiery word down here, most people would just tell you, you know, if they didn't say I'm not religious, they'd say, oh, I'm spiritual, you know, and they try to hustle away. But I think the best way, I think, to communicate, if one were trying to communicate the Gospels to atheists, is they would have to show good historical extra biblical evidence that the Gospels were true. And as someone who finds history interesting but doesn't know a whole lot about the history of the Gospels, or much about the history of that time period, I tend to avoid that area generally. I know what the Gospels say, but it's the history of them that really interests me a lot more, and I think for atheists it would interest them a lot more if one were to talk about that, because just saying, oh, well, in the Old Testament it predicted that this would happen, you know, they pierced my hands and my feet, and then, oh, Jesus got crucified, they pierced his hands and feet in the New Testament. That's not particularly convincing to a lot of atheists, namely because they look at religions in general and note that all religions make prophecies that have been, quote, fulfilled. And so I think, okay, you know, all religions make fulfilled prophecies. So it's got to be something, if you want to communicate Christianity specifically and not just religion, because as Christopher Hitchens said, you know, if you can argue, or if you can get to deism, you still got all your work ahead of you.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and so for Christianity specifically, it would have to be good, and by good I mean really good historical evidence, extra biblically speaking, for the Gospels. And I think that if that could be found, then that would convince more atheists or agnostics or, quote, spiritual people than you know, just saying this is what the Gospels say would.
You see, in my experience,
that's just my 2 cents.
No, honestly, I appreciate that's why I wanted to talk to you, to find out, because as somebody, I want to share the gospel. I'm not one of these who's going to stand on a street corner and scream at people. But I do, you know, I genuinely believe what I believe. So, like anybody, you want to try and share that with people, but you want to do it in a way that's going to make sense to people rather than just turn them away. That's why I thought it's an interesting question to ask.
Your camera's kind of turned down.
Oh, right. Sorry. Oh, you can see the camera.
Yeah, I can see your camera. There you go.
Oh, right. I didn't realize you could see the camera. I thought I was on off camera, but never mind. There's no problem. So the historicity, that's a big thing for most atheists, you think?
Do what?
So it's the historicity, the actual getting into like the history of the truth of the Bible. That's the major thing, you think, for a lot of atheists.
Yeah, specifically, if you want to talk about the New Testament, well, I mean the Old Testament too, of course, but yes, the historicity is very interesting. I think I'm very interested in history, but I don't know a whole lot about it. Um,
Right.
if you were to look at the what was it called, the Babylonian captivity, which is the Jews got kicked out and they mingled with the Zoroastrians while they were uh, out of Babylon. Um,
Yeah.
they they got a whole lot of these different theological ideas from the Zoroastrians, because the Zoroastrians had this concept of dualism. It's like your whole
Yes.
life is a constant battle between good and evil, and so the Jews adopted that, or at least parts of it, from the Zoroastrians, and then they kind of adapted it on their own. Like the idea of Satan, I think, came from the Zoroastrians, and then there were other things like that. And so I find that I find that kind of stuff very fascinating. But
Yeah.
that's but you look at things like that and you realize, oh, okay, well, this is where they got some of these theological ideas. Well, if it came to them from this purely natural, purely historical, just an intermingling of cultures, well, then that kind of deals away with the historicity of these beliefs.
Yeah, I understand. I have a friend actually who's a Zoroastrian.
Yeah,
My
yeah, I
good
do too.
my good friend Del. Me and him sit and we talk for hours and hours and hours, and he's Zoroastrian. We get along very well, but obviously we have two different beliefs. So yeah, he's told me a lot about it. And then another couple of more questions, and you can ask me anything you wish, Jackson. But how do you go with, because one of the major things that convinced me, I was raised in a Christian home. My mother was Christian, my father wasn't. My grandmother was like Bible basher. Uh, but personal experience, and I'm not sure, because I think if your brain's scientific, how do you deal with people's? Because you must know there are millions and millions and millions of personal experiences. You just go on YouTube and you can see them all,
Mhm.
and every day there's testimonies uploaded of this is how my life's transformed and this is how God's touched me. And
Right. Yeah.
how do you, as a scientist, look at that as evidence and either dismiss it or weigh it? How do you do that?
Well, it's a case by case basis. Um, some are more interesting than others. Some, like for example, someone were to say, I was looking for my car keys, and then I prayed I'd find my car keys, and then I found my car keys.
Yeah, yeah.
Mandela Hunt's used that example. So that's kind of on the one end where you just say, okay. I mean, you were probably looking in the right direction anyways for your keys. Um, for stuff that's more interesting, I guess, I guess I'd say, um, things like was there's a kid in, was it Kazakhstan? Oh, I can't remember. Anyways, this kid was it's one of the former Soviet uh, territories, and so this little baby had like he was in a Muslim family, and he had like Quranic verses on his arm,
Right.
and people would come from miles around to see these Quranic verses on his arm, and you hear something about like that, and you think, what? How is that possible? How are
Yeah.
they interpreting this event? As it turns out, however, the kid had a kind of rash, and if you like lightly move your finger along his arm, then you can draw basically anything. You could draw like a flower,
Right.
for instance,
Yeah.
and because it would like inflame the area where you drew with or where you traced with your finger. So,
Right.
um, so it's a case by case, it's a case by case base, but in that regard, though, me using that example just shows that people believe these miracles happen in every religion, or that they have personal experience. If you want to look up someone who had personal
Yeah.
experience with, Lord Krishna, whatever, uh, listen to a Beatles song. I don't know, or
Yeah.
or of course I hear about Christian experiences because I'm here in the United States,
Yeah. Sure.
but I also know Muslims who will say they've had experiences with Allah. Hindus will say they've had experiences with Lord Krishna. It's just it. Every religion says or has adherents who will say that they have a personal experience with deity X.
Yeah.
So,
You see, the
so
reason
it's
oh, sorry, you
no. Go ahead.
continue. No, I was going to
I
say
was just that was it. That was it.
I was going to say that the reason why I'm quite lucky because my job, I have to travel around with my job, and it's for me one of the things that's very reassuring for faith. It's not the main reason for faith. The main thing for me was a personal experience. But I'm in Africa, Asia, Europe, US. I'm all over the world, and I see week in, week out, the same thing. Life's being transformed, even in languages I don't speak. I don't even speak in some of the languages, but you see the transformations. And I speak to I don't know how many people in the year. I speak to people. So everywhere I travel to, I will go to a different church because obviously that's my love. And I sit with people, drink coffee with people, and I hear so many different stories, but not just from UK or US, but all around the world. And I wonder that's why I was wondering scientifically. I don't know. I don't know how it works. For me, it would almost be, you know what? And this is a genuine question, not trying to persuade you for anything. In science, it seems to be that if all the scientists agree on something, then it's classed as. I know they don't say the word fact, but it's classed as it is a fact, even though the official name is not fact. Is there a difference? Do you see a difference?
Yes. So what we call it in science is we call it tentative. We call it a tentative theory. With someone who claims to have seen God at the foot of their bed, or Jesus, or what have you, or saved by an angel in a car crash or whatever. Because I know there are books out there. I've seen the books. There was one that was like 100 testimonies of like people who were or who met angels or something like that, and it's like, oh, this is definitive proof that angels exist.
Yeah.
Of course, the same kind of stuff exists for Muslims. The same stuff exists for all these other ones. But in science, well, I'll address the science part first, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah, sure.
I don't find the anecdotes convincing. So for science, we consider things to be theories in science when we can test and repeat. Yeah, as Paul points out, science is never just a vote. It's what can we show to be demonstrably accurate. In the case of heck, you could take anything. Let's take one that's not true anymore. A lot of people believed in in vitalism, for instance, but vitalism was shown not be true because we can synthesize, or scientists managed to synthesize urea, for instance, outside of the Bible. So there was no divine force in like biopolymers or things like that. So that was tossed out the window. Evolution, on the other hand, Darwin first proposed it, and there was he didn't propose evolution as a whole. He proposed natural selection, and there was some pushback on that from other scientists. But as time has gone on, we have seen over and over and over, unless you were to ask Fodor, for instance, or Mike Riddle, whether or not natural selection happens, then you can see that it does. I mean, we can observe natural selection all the time, and they do observe it all the time, pretty much every day. And so it's not just a vote, it's what we can show to be demonstrably true. Like, we know natural selection is true because you and I, we can independently test it ourselves, even if we have no background in science. If we learn what natural selection is, we can go out and study it in the field.
Yeah.
So it's not contingent upon any single person having this one experience with natural selection.
Yeah.
So on the other side of that, even if one person were to say natural selection is not true, then other people can test it and show that it is. The opposite. It's kind of the opposite with anecdotal experiences with God. If someone says, like I said, I dropped my key, or I lost my keys, I prayed, and then I found my keys. Well, we could run simulations of that, and we could see that, well, there wasn't really a divine cause involved. He just happened to be going in the right direction at the right speed,
Sure.
and he found his keys. He was looking down at the right moment, and he found his keys.
Sure.
And so every time that an anecdotal experience has been investigated, scientifically speaking, like the one with the kid with the Quranic verses on his arm, it has been shown that, okay, well, this isn't actually divine. This is something, strange. Even the what were they called? The guys, stigmata. You had all the people claiming stigmata in the early 1900s. Some of those were investigated, and it turns out, okay, well, they were probably doing it to themselves. Or the oh, it's been a while since I've looked up like miraculous stuff, or I've done reading on miraculous stuff. The Catholic saints who don't rot over time, or they don't degrade, they're incorruptible. That's what it's called. So every time it has been investigated, it turns out, oh no, someone's tampered with the bodies. They put wax on the face, or there's some kind of thing going on here under the surface, which is not supernatural, but rather very natural. Also, we humans have a propensity to seek patterns. And so we like to think our senses are pretty good. Maybe most of the time they are. There was a test done by a psychologist. I can't remember the name, but this psychologist made a video where there are people passing basketballs back and forth. You heard of it? You heard of that experiment?
No, I've not heard of it. Oh, yes, I have, with the gorilla.
Yeah.
Was there a gorilla? No.
Yeah, exactly. So the people are passing the ball back and forth, and the audience is told to count how many times the basketball is passed back and forth. And then at the end, she says, "Yeah, who saw the gorilla?" And everyone says, "What? A gorilla?"
Yeah.
And so, so it's pattern seeking. It's lack of ability to test in a lot of cases and things like that. It's sort of a combination of factors, and that's why I said that we should take it on a case-by-case basis.
And what about not the miracles, as far as but the life transformations?
The what?
The life transformations.
What do you
mean? What I mean is, if you go to any, let's say I'm speaking out of turn because I don't know the area that you live in. But I came back from Sierra Leone and Zambia and Malaysia, and every single place that I go to, you see people telling their stories of God touching their lives, and their lives being transformed through the power of God. And this is something that's been recorded. It's I don't know how many examples. You can go on any on YouTube daily and watch people who've just come to Christ, and you see this in every country of the world and have done for 2,000 years. And for me, when I hear people saying, "I just dismiss that," that makes me curious, as if to say, why would you just dismiss that?
So with people, I have no doubt that a lot of people get feelings of euphoria from coming to God. I have no doubt of that, and we know how this works. We know that endorphins are produced. We know this is the same area of the brain that is involved with sexual activity. So there's a lot of pleasure involved. So when we look at people who have religious experiences, these are tied to different parts of the brain, and we can see the effects in real time. So it's not so much a matter of simply hand waving it off. It's a matter of I can understand what they're feeling scientifically. Of course, not. I can't understand what they're feeling like there at the moment because I never had those experiences for myself.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not so much a matter of hand waving. It's a matter of I know different explanations that could account for several different natural explanations that could account for what is happening here. And I mean, and again, it comes. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, if somebody has like a euphoric moment, because of a rush of endorphins, that tends not to produce long-term life changes. I would have thought it would be like me and Peter discussed once. If you go to a rock concert and you feel super emotional because the music has hyped you up, and you become in a euphoric state. Generally speaking, when you leave the concert an hour later, you're the same person as you was when you walked in. Whereas with Jesus Christ, it seems to be completely different as far as people's whole lives transform from that moment, and not just one person's life, or in one location or on one meeting, but thousands or millions or billions of lives for a very, very long period of time. Not so the endorphin rush would explain the initial feeling, but doesn't explain the after effects.
Well, it's a constant, or it is constant every time you come back to that religious, to thinking about religion. It's another flood of endorphins, and so you. Oh yeah, that's a fair point. Beach pointed out that PTSD is caused by one event, but it affects your life very heavily thereafter.
Yeah, but that's for a different reason.
Well, it's not. Yeah, I get kind of. I mean, it's one event, but it is this one event that had such a big effect on your life that it. Yeah, and it triggers reactions later, which is the same as what religion does when you get that feeling of euphoria. Whenever you come back to this, that feeling of euphoria is being triggered again. But also, this happens in every religion. It's not just Christianity. Muslims will feel euphoria. Hindus feel euphoria. I think Buddhists. What?
I'm not so sure, Jackson, because I work with Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus. That's part of my work. I don't get the same reports. I never hear a Muslim saying they had a euphoric experience of God. I've never heard that, and I work with them. I don't know. I maybe 10,000 every year. Same with Hindus, same with Buddhists. I never hear of the euphoric experience with any other religion except Christianity.
I have. In high school, there was a girl I knew who was very religious, and she had euphoric experiences in her religion. But let me see. I'm sure we can look up others, so I'm not just talking from.
Yeah. I've never experienced it. What I hear from other religions is it brings a great deal of peace. And a lot of people have found a peace especially in Islam, because I work with Muslims a lot. They find a great deal of peace in the in the 5 pillars and in the praying 5 times per day, etc. They feel a great peace.
Oh, at Mecca. Sorry.
Yeah, at Mecca. Yeah.
At Mecca, there's a great feeling of euphoria.
Well, like you say, I know many people who's been to Mecca, but that's not my. I can't say because I'm not Muslim. I'm Christian, but that's just my personal experience. I haven't heard that that's in every religion.
The pilgrimage to Mecca is dangerous but exhilarating.
Yes, of course. Yeah, of course.
The central.
I think there's 1 million people going to Hajj this year, so it's
spiritually and physically. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, I was going to say there's over 1 million people going to Hajj, so of course they're going to have an experience. But I'm not sure. I just think sometimes when I speak with atheists online, it seems to dismiss all of the testimonies that people say. I don't know. To me, it seems unusual, should I say? And that's why I wasn't. That's why what I was saying was that's why I wasn't sure. You see, if you hear the same thing, if I was to hear hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and I see with my own eyes thousands and thousands or hundreds and hundreds of people coming to Christ and having the same experience and the same feeling and having their lives transformed. As a scientist, I don't know. I don't know. As a human, that makes me intrigued. I'm not sure as a scientist whether that's something that makes you intrigued or just write off.
You have to ask it to me again.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I don't.
what I was meaning was, I'll try to think of the easiest way to say. What I'm not saying is because of the numbers of people, if you should believe because the numbers of people, are Christian. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you was to see with your eyes the life transformation of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and you saw this with your own eyes, to then write that off as they're all mistaken, they just had a euphoric experience because of an endorphin rush one day, seems to me to be dismissive without reason.
Would you say that other religions can transform lives in the same way?
No.
No?
No, I wouldn't know.
Why is that?
I think they can transform behavior. Yeah.
What's the difference?
I think there's a difference because I see my Muslim friends, my Hindu friends who I speak with most days, they have a great peace in that they do works every day to earn the path to paradise as such. So they find a great peace in the fact that they if you pray 5 times per day, and if you do certain actions, this will lead you towards paradise. And I see a great peace in that, but I don't see is the relationship. That's the big difference, I would say.
So here's what I found on religious ecstasy caused by experiences.
Yeah.
So this is from Wikipedia. It says, quote, religious people may hold the view that true religious ecstasy occurs only in their religious context, e.g. as a gift from the supernatural being whom they follow, and it cannot be induced by natural means or human activities. Trance-like states, which are often interpreted as religious ecstasies, have been deliberately induced with techniques or ecstatic practices, including prayer, religious rituals, meditation, breathing exercises, physical exercise, sex, music, dancing, sweating, fasting, thirsting, and psychotropic drugs. An ecstatic experience may take place in occasion of contact with something or somebody perceived as extremely beautiful or holy. It may also happen without any known reason. The particular technique that an individual uses to induce ecstasy is usually one that is associated with that individual's particular religious and cultural traditions. As a result, an ecstatic experience is usually interpreted with the particular individual religious context and cultural traditions. These interpretations often include statements about contact with supernatural or spiritual beings, about receiving new information as a revelation, also religion-related explanations of subsequent changes of value, attitude, and behavior.
Yeah.
So what?
Now, my question would be, Jackson, what makes you believe what you've just read rather than believe the experiences of the people?
Do what?
My question would be, you just read the article now.
Mm-hmm.
What makes you believe the article over the experiences of the people?
Because we can test it repeatedly. We can show repeatedly, you and I, if we had never seen these religious experiences before, if we never had any history with them, we could perform these and come to that same conclusion. Also,
How?
How? We could put someone under an MRI?
Yeah. So, but I'm talking about as a...
Or not MRI, or whatever the machine that is used for...
yeah.
Also, wait, so wait, is the issue here about religion transforming lives or having a personal relationship with...
personal relationship and transforming lives, both. Can I give you one example?
Okay.
Just there's a lady very close to us. I don't want to mention names because in case she ever hears this. And she recently came to our church. She's not a very good start in life. And she recently gave her life to God. She had anger problems. Basically, she used to go beat up anybody that disagreed with her. She gave her life to Jesus. It wasn't a particular, shaking on the ground and doing all the things you see on YouTube. But we've watched her life is completely and utterly transformed. And this is one person out of, I don't know, maybe 100 people just here. There's another down the road, and this is happening every single day. And I'm wondering, my question with the science side of it, that's why I'm genuinely intrigued, is can science reproduce that in people?
Can we reproduce their personal experiences?
And the lot,
No, probably not. Not to every single detail, but we can produce the feeling that they have. I mean, like I said, no one's doubting that. I don't doubt that, and I don't think anyone is doubting that these people feel something when they have these religious experiences. They are feeling a rush of endorphins. They are feeling this euphoria, which I don't think anyone's doubting. But the issue isn't whether or not they feel these things. The issue is whether or not this is connected with anything supernatural. That's the issue. And people just saying that they felt something when they prayed is not good evidence of that, of them having felt anything supernatural.
Well, that's my question. Why is it not good evidence?
Because there's nothing, even if we were to look at these people when they have their religious experiences, there's nothing supernatural involved. Everything that we see is we see rush of endorphins each time that they have their religious experiences, or we see confirmation bias in what they're looking for, which was in the case of my guy who was looking for his keys. Confirmation bias is a really big thing with people who pray. And so, would we all have the same experience if, someone were to make this one prayer and they were to feel euphoria? Well, no, we wouldn't, but we can understand why this person does. We can independently understand.
Go on, just say that again. Sorry, Jackson, I missed the last part.
I said, even if we can't personally or feel what they're feeling, we can understand why they're feeling these things. And it has never, ever turned out to be supernatural. It has never turned out to be any specific God. It just has always been these people feel euphoric because it's part of their cultural or religious experiences.
And do you think science is able to is science able to say whether it's supernatural or not? Does science have a way of measuring supernatural to dismiss it?
Well, if the supernatural were to interact in our world, then they would have natural effects. So theoretically, yes.
How do you know it would have natural effects?
How could it interact with anything if it didn't have natural effects?
So
if we're saying that we are natural organisms and things that are outside, or natural beings, material, whatever, and things outside of our universe are supernatural, well, there's already a metaphysical issue with how the supernatural interacts with natural and vice versa. But yeah. I'm just saying, theoretically, if it could happen, then there should be some way to measure it.
But I'm asking, is there a way to measure it?
As of right now, there has been no evidence of anything that's completely, or that would even indicate non-natural phenomena. So I would say, I would say theoretically, but there's nothing to indicate it right now. There has never been.
Yeah, because this is me and Peter had this discussion. This is where me and science, this is where I get confused. My understanding was science is the study of the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's the study of the natural world, and then it says we have no evidence of the supernatural world, is it qualified to have a knowledge of the supernatural world?
Well, first there would have to be a definition of supernatural, and then we'd have to start with the definition of what supernatural is. Just trying to grasp what the supernatural is for us is, I would imagine, rather difficult. We throw some labels on it, but as of right now, there is not even really a definition as to what that would entail.
Yeah. Well, because there's no definition, it's dismissed.
Okay, so can you provide a definition of that, or what we should expect if it were true, if there were a supernatural entity or realm?
Well, yeah, I would say the life changes in people would be a supernatural life change.
Yeah. But what if someone's coming from Christianity to atheism, for instance, and their life still changes?
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, they could do this. What about healings? Oh, I could give you my personal experience if you like.
Okay.
So my personal experience of what I would call supernatural is number one, the number of healings that I've seen with my own eyes, and number two, I had a what I would call a supernatural experience. You may have heard the talk me and Peter had, I think the very first talk or maybe the second talk. When I came to Christ, I was, I think, around 15, 16 years old at a convention called Spring Harvest. After we'd given out, I was with a friend called Simon. After we gave our life to Christ, we went outside into the field. Simon was speaking in tongues, which I know, some people have issues with. While we was out having we was in a field together, it was pouring down with rain. And this is one of the main reasons why I believe it was pouring down with rain. And yet me and Simon was bone dry. The rain wouldn't touch us. And we would hold our arms out in front of us. We would hold our clothes out to sea. And even though the rain was pouring down and we're in the middle of a field, the rain wouldn't touch us. And this for me was there's no other explanation for me. There's no natural explanation for me for this, except to be a supernatural event. So that was a personal experience for me.
I honestly don't doubt that you believe that, but that's really about the only thing I can say in that regard.
Yeah, but if these events are happening, like you say, I'm not sure how science or religion could ever move towards each other in that regards, because these are events that are happening all over the world. They could happen to you, Jackson. They could happen for you.
Theoretically, yes, but as someone who did actually sincerely pray about 8 years ago and has still yet to receive any message, it's a little it's a bit lost on me. I would say.
No, I can accept that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. If these healings are happening, why aren't they documented?
Well, I think, like I say, we discussed this with on a previous video. I don't think, I think some of them are documented, but I think for me personally, when we've been seeing healings, it's not something where we're going to call a doctor and please come out and see, and we're going to heal this person. It's a personal thing between you, the person, between God, and it's not the person who's healing, it's God who's healing. So I can understand that from a scientific point of view, it'd be nice to bring somebody in a room and have 7 scientists sat around examining them. That's just not how it works with healing.
Well, see, that's what makes something. Well, it's not even so much if they are, paid professional scientists. What makes something science is that we can use the scientific method to understand it. We can test it and repeat it. So that's what the great thing about the scientific method is. Anyone can use it. You just have to be sure to follow the conclusions wherever they may lead. In the case of healings, for instance, do you see, for instance, amputees healed?
I haven't. No, I haven't.
Yeah, I don't think there are any examples of that, because if a human leg is cut off, then we can't really regrow that, and so it's something well understood. And so with all the healings, even if sure they may seem very interesting, but there has always been, wherever it's been able to be investigated, some underlying natural cause that we see, and then we can understand why such and such thing happened.
Well, I've got to say, we have to agree to disagree, because I've seen the healings with my own eyes. So the challenge I have is, if you see it with your own eyes, then you tend to believe it. It's just...
Depends. Some people, if you look if you ask people who are no longer Christians who had euphoric experiences, then they will tell you, yeah, I believe that I saw Jesus, but I understand why I had those experiences now. I understand that it was a rush of endorphins, it was just euphoric experience, etc.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I can only go off my personal experience, Jackson. So I'm not. I don't want to keep going over the same issue. It's almost for me, the people who, if you want to see the healings and the miracles and the life transformations and so on, you would need to be in the places that these things happen. Which means that, you know, like, these things happen in churches and in Christian communities. You know, where people are actively praying for people, etc. So it's going to be very difficult to see them without being in that environment, I think.
Okay, well, if it is just anecdotes for this, then we can move on to something else if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
are there
sure.
any other questions you have?
No. I was just wanted to know how science dealt with that. That was my main.
Well, as far as
yeah.
anecdotes go, it case by case basis for most things. Also, I mean, if you look at what is it? You know, trials. You look at trials, and someone says, "I know this person is the murderer." Well, that may or may not be true. If we can find corroborating evidence independent of humans that this person is the murderer, like we found their DNA at the crime scene, or, you know, their blood or something like that, then we're much more inclined to believe that this person is actually the murderer, rather than just this person who's claiming, who even may have claimed to have seen it. But there was a case. There was a case, and I put this in my second response to Kent Hovind's video, where a guy was quote ID'd by 5 different witnesses, but it wasn't the guy who did this thing, and DNA evidence eventually showed that he wasn't the one who did this. I don't remember what the case was, but if you guys check out my second response to Kent Hovind, you can see I linked it there and everything. So, but yeah. So
just one final thing, then you ask me whatever you wish to ask.
Okay.
When you said about the corroborated evidence, you see, for me it was a personal experience, but I have friends who came to Christ through evidence, and what their evidence was not only a personal experience, but also they looked at the I can't remember the word now. The word slipped my mind. Archaeology, the archaeological finds, geographical finds, the textual evidence, and they based it as a case. Whereas for me, I didn't do that because I had a personal experience. But if you're looking in your scenario for the corroborating evidence, there's plenty out there.
Well, so this is a totally different area of research, because this is independent of just personal experiences. This is stuff we can independently corroborate and talk about.
Yeah, sure.
With regard to archaeology, a lot of the stuff in the Old Testament, for instance, has been overturned by archaeology. There's a lot of question as to whether or not some of the main characters in the Old Testament were physical characters. Moses is one. Abraham is another. There are events which categorically didn't happen. The Exodus didn't happen, for instance. Israeli scholars have been excavating that area for years and years, just over a century of excavation, and still there just is no evidence of an Exodus, for instance. The total population of Egypt at the time that the Exodus is claimed to have happened was about 3 million people. And then, but according to the story, something like 2 million of them were just the Hebrews.
Yeah, about 1 million, they say. Oh, yeah,
1 million.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So I mean, the point the point being that there's no evidence from Egyptian records that 2 million people left Egypt. There are no records of these gigantic armies of nomads wandering out in the desert. It's just that kind of stuff gets rid of some of the Old Testament stories. I bet we could have a long conversation on why biology disagrees with the. Actually, I don't know. Do you agree with the creation account? I don't want to assume anything.
Yeah, yeah, I do, but it's not what it's not my it's not where my faith comes from. So
Okay.
it's not some, it's almost for me it's an interesting subject. I do believe in evolution. I don't believe that we came from a transition from apes, etc. And that's really where I stand on it. It's an interesting issue for me, but not a huge. It's not an issue that affects my faith as such. So I have some friends who are theistic evolutionists. I have some friends who are Christian and evolutionists. I have some friends who are Christian and creationists. I just happen to go to this side for me.
Okay. Well. Yeah. We definitely are apes. We can have a conversation on that if you want. But what I was also going to go from. Well, before we get there, I was also going to go to the archaeological evidence of
Yeah,
stuff
sure.
like was it the city of was it Jericho wasn't inhabited around the time that the Hebrews were supposed to have gotten there from the Exodus. There's also the Tower of Babel turns out is based on a Babylonian ziggurat to one of their gods.
But you see on this now, you see where you made that then sound as if it was a certain fact.
Well, I mean that's at least what the historians say. I'm not a historian,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
from
Yeah.
their
Yeah. And you do know you can travel to Jerusalem today and go and see most of the sites.
Yeah, of course.
So, and you can also go and you can look at this. There's so much. If you look for archaeological evidence, there's so much which supports the Bible. Granted, there are some which we still haven't found, but I would say there's a vast majority more that supports the Bible being true.
In what way?
In as far as archaeological finds. If you was to Google now archaeological finds from biblical, you'll find a lot more information on actual finds. I think there's one particular video on YouTube. I think it's 100 archaeological finds that support the Bible. And like you say, I'm no archaeologist, but I do. But for me, that's not even to me, that's a plus point, not a minus point.
Okay. I mean, there are people who know a lot more than me on this topic, but so far as I've read books like Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict, and then I look up what the actual historical consensus is on things that he says with regard to archaeology, and he's often way off, or he would rather stick with what the theological consensus is on these events rather than the historical consensus, and so it's not very convincing from a lot of the arguments from archaeology that I've seen. I mean, I'm not going to doubt that there are no real places they went to, no real people. I'm sure a lot of the people and places are real, and that's what happens in a lot of ancient literature. There are real places and people. The Epic of Gilgamesh was a real person. Is a real place. Utnapishtim probably is not a real person. Enkidu, probably not a real person. But the place where the story is centralized is a real place, and Gilgamesh was a real king in Sumeria. So was a real Sumerian king. So it's just, well, we can apply the same kind of archaeological thinking, or we can apply the same kind of historical analyses to the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we see pretty much the same pattern. We see real places and some real people, but also aggrandized events in these different areas. Like was there ever really a giant like a giant cyclops or actually I don't know if he was a cyclops. He was at least a giant who inhabited the woods. That Gilgamesh and Enkidu had to kill. Well, probably not.
Yeah.
And if there,
I don't know.
if there was,
yeah.
you what?
I say I
Yeah,
genuinely don't know. I don't know.
Okay, well, it's just, the point is, it's just you get the point though, that there are
Yeah,
some real places and some real people. Yeah,
yeah,
but it's
I
a
understand.
aggrandized.
Yeah.
So yeah, that seems to be what happened for a lot of the archaeological things. My area though is biology,
Sure.
and so it's not just the creation account; it's other things in there that make me go, "What are they talking about?" What did it say? Genesis, was it chapter 26 or something like that? Basically, this guy has his sheep, and he has them mate in front of these rods that are all laid across each other. So when the sheep mate, they produce offspring that are striped.
Right.
Okay, from a genetic,
yeah.
yeah,
No,
from a genetic point of view, do what?
No, you keep talking. I'll just look it up now. I've never seen this verse, so.
Okay, hold on. Let me. I can actually probably find it. Let's see.
I have to get the glasses on. I'm getting old, Jackson.
Mate in front rods. Oh, Genesis 30:39. Okay. Genesis 30:39. So it says they made it in front of branches and they bore young that were streaked or speckled or spotted. So from a from a genetic perspective, that does not happen. The phenotype of offspring is not affected by what the parents were looking at while they mated.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd all probably look like the ceiling of our parents' bedroom. And so things like that are really strange, and I've asked apologists about that. And
yeah, I don't know the answer. Supernatural. That would be.
That was what he said.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, that was what he said. He just said, it's. Oh, God just probably did that for some reason. I thought, okay, it's not really a convincing answer, but
yeah, I'd have to.
I don't know why God would be.
To be honest, now
I don't know why God would be. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. You talk, and I'll stay quiet for a moment.
You want to go ahead, or
yeah.
You want me?
You go ahead, Jackson.
Okay, so from a biological perspective, this doesn't happen,
sure.
And that wasn't a convincing answer. I don't know why God would have need to make some sheep spotted out in this little pastoral community. I don't really see what the issue there is. I don't know why he would be interested. He said, "Oh, you know what? These sheep aren't looking speckled or spotted. I better change that." And so, so that was something weird. But then you get into the creation account. Things get even more weird. Or things like in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, they talk about the laws for washing your hands because you're not supposed, or you have laws for washing your hands or preparing meat a certain way because if you don't, then demons will kill you. Well, it's not actually demons that are killing you; it's viruses that are and bacteria that are infecting the meat, and then you're eating it. Which is why in Islam they don't eat pork because it was a lot more difficult to prepare pork and keep it from rotting. And so when someone did eat it, it was likely to get sick and die. So but yeah, then you go to the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I had an interesting conversation this week with a guy. You know the Bible has the biblical food laws for the Old Testament. And inside here it says don't eat pork, no shellfish. It goes through the whole list of this. And again, this week I was talking with somebody who just come back from the doctors. He had something, I don't know if you have in the US, gout, an illness called gout. And he got a list, came back from the doctors of what he shouldn't eat. And it was almost word for word what it said in the Bible. That was just this week. So it was quite interesting. Just I'm not saying it's scientific, but it was quite interesting. His list and the biblical list of what not to eat was almost identical that he got back from his doctor. So it was just off the record.
Okay, well, I mean, I love bacon
Yeah,
and pork chops.
yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, when you get to the origin story for the Bible, which I know people who are the old Earth creationists or old Earth theists, whatever, they say, oh, this part is allegory. You can just kind of skip that part. But if you look at the scientific, or there are some people who, as we said earlier, try to mix the two. They say day one was the first 5 billion years, and day two was another billion years, etc. Things like that. It's kind of difficult to do that with the way the creation account is set up, like plants before the stars and all that. That's a little bit difficult to pull off. But or talking about the ark, for instance, the genetic bottleneck, the implications, the genetic implications that the ark has are just enormous. There would be no humans or animals if we had all went through a genetic bottleneck of that magnitude. That only a few thousand years ago, there wouldn't be such populations that we have today, and if there were, they would be very heavily inbred.
Yeah,
and would not be good.
Are you of the belief that we all go back to a single ancestry?
Yes, we all go back to. See, what I don't really understand about that is we all go to recent common ancestors with each other. All humans are about 50th cousins or closer. So, I mean, I don't really. My closest or my common ancestor is my cousin. With my cousin is, my grandmother or our shared grandmother, and then her, closest, and then her cousin, her shared ancestor is her grandmother, etc. And so we can see we go all the way back that, they're common ancestors, and so why do we not apply this to life as a whole? And then we can cross-check it with genetics, and we can see that yes, we do all actually share a common ancestor.
Yeah, it's a conversation. I'm certainly not qualified in the same way as you are. I'm looking at it. I take it on faith. I'll admit that openly. But for me, science is going back. Science seems to be going more in the direction of the Bible to me, because so far with genetics, from my meager understanding, it is starting to go back to that we did come. The life started from a single source or a single pair.
Depends on what you mean, because the Bible says we were all created as humans, and our last ancestor, or our only last ancestor of all humans, was a human, and there was nothing before that. It was just, humans all the way down, and science would say no to that.
Yeah, science would say no to that, but they do agree that it all goes back to a single ancestor.
Yeah, there's scientists are kind of funny. They named the last ancestor for all of our mitochondrial Eve, and then the last ancestor for all of our Y chromosomes, Y chromosomal Adam. But they lived at different times and never would have met each other or mated. Yeah, and also they were part of a population of humans. They weren't like, it wasn't like the first female human was wandering around, then a little while later, or a few thousand years later, the first male was wandering around. They were part of populations.
But they haven't got. Is it possible in the future they'll go back further than that?
What do you mean?
If mitochondrial Eve is the current earliest ancestor, in the future, could it go earlier than her?
I mean, I'm not really sure what you mean. Those are our, like, mitochondrial Eve is our most recent common ancestor for all humans. Like, all humans trace their genetics back to this, trace their mitochondria back to this one point in our past. We also share, I mean, we also share a common ancestor with, yeah, that's what I said. Most recent common ancestor. Yeah.
Yeah.
With all humans, and so we trace back our ancestry to that. I don't really think we could go any farther. I mean, by definition, like all of our common ancestors before that, before Eve, mitochondrial Eve, were also our most recent common ancestor with regard to mitochondria. So,
Yeah. Could you explain that? I'm not too sure. For me, see, for me, I'm just a simple guy, Jackson. I look at it as if you look at two people. I think when I speak with people, this is where I get confused. It's a genuine question. It's not me trying to say you're wrong. I certainly don't. I'm not qualified to say that. When I look at it, when I speak to people, I see where I get confused is the Bible says it started with Adam and Eve and grew. So the tree is growing from the bottom upwards. When I speak to people who are evolutionists, they start at the top and do the tree backwards. And in the middle, there seems to be a huge gap. And this is where I get confused. Genuine question.
So, okay, so you're saying, so you said the Bible starts with humans and goes up to today, and evolution starting with today and going backwards? Is that what you said?
I'll give it in a different way, maybe easier in a different way.
I mean, okay.
If abiogenesis occurs, and however it started, whether obviously I believe in it's from God, you can believe it's from natural sources, it doesn't matter. There must have been a first, whatever it was. There must have been a first life or two first life. But from there, it grew. But I'm looking at it from a simple point of view. Where if it grew as from 2 to 4 to 6 to 10 to, it would grow as a tree outwards.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I speak to evolutionists, it seems to be they go from the top, from where we are now, and come backwards. But the two trees don't match.
I mean, we had to. Okay, yeah. I basically will have to summarize how this all works. So basically, when you take I don't know, have you ever taken a paternity test, or have you ever had a?
No, I have no children. I have no children.
Okay, so there's a show called Maury here in the United States where they always ask, "Well, is he the father?" And so they make the guy take a paternity test, and it shows yes, he's the father. Okay, so what they're doing is they're testing the genetics of this guy. They want to see that if his genetics match that of the child, then he is in fact the father. So we can do this same thing for all organisms, every single one of them, everything that has DNA in it, which is all life. We can do this test for. So we test it on. We do a sort of paternity test on chimps and elephants and oak trees and penicillin, and we see this branching hierarchy unfolding. It started with Linnaeus, and so Linnaeus was doing it first by phenotypes, by how the organisms look on the outside, and he realized that humans, chimps, gorillas, orangutans, we were all in this group of greater apes. Gibbons are lesser apes. Yeah. Even though I like gibbons, I think they should also they're pretty great apes too. but so we realized this. Of course, he was a creationist, so he didn't want us to be grouped with them. So he created a separate category called Pungidae for gorillas, orangutans, and chimps. So then what we realized is that genetics matches phenotypes. We realized that the genes affect how these phenotypes play out, and so we can trace, and so we can understand this, and we can go back and we can see, for instance, we have mutational rates. We can see about the time that these different mutations occurred, and we can see about the time that our different common ancestors, that when our most recent common ancestor with some other organism lived. For our common ancestor with chimps, it lived about somewhere between 6 and 7 million years ago, and we can see this from multiple sources, not just from the genes themselves, but also from endogenous retroviruses. For instance, ALUs, and other things, and then we so we can keep tracing that back. We trace the genetics back, and we see that our next most recent common ancestor was with gorillas about 8 million years ago, and then with orangutans, like 12 million years ago, I think. And so we can do that sort of thing with all organisms. We show that African elephants are most closely related to Asian elephants, and then manatees, and then hyraxes, blah, 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 blah. And then we share a common ancestor with them a long time ago, like late Cretaceous.
Yeah.
And so we start with what we see today, and we find these branches. We look at these organisms and we find where they connect up with each other, and there's a whole slew of technical data on this stuff. It's just what we do in
of course, that's
biology. And so you go and you go to seminars like they have here at LSU, and you can see who from like black cap vireos, for instance, was one I saw not this week but last week, and this one of the researchers was looking at black cap vireos in Texas and seeing, okay, which are these black cap vireos, they're birds, most closely related to. And so they're related to these other black capped vireos, and they share a most recent common ancestor, etc.
Yeah.
And so this whole tree of who's related to who connects all of us. We all have DNA. We can test that. We can see that we're more closely related to chimps and to mammals as a whole than we are to, say, crocodiles. We're more closely related to crocodiles than trout. We're more closely related to trout than, sponges, and you go all the way down. So that's basically how the tree unfolds.
No, and that to me makes perfect sense.
Okay.
But then what I'm saying is, then if you come from the opposite direction, so you're going, that's top down.
Mm-hmm.
That's top down. Does the same model work from bottom up? From abiogenesis up? Because this is where my confusion comes, because the model you just said now, I don't. You're a far smarter guy than I am on it, so it's okay me saying on faith I'll believe this, but you have evidence. There's no problem. But does your model work from the bottom up as well as the top down? Because for me, if you have abiogenesis, which I believe is created by God, but even if you believe it's through natural processes, from there to go upwards, you're starting with a number of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. How then do you get to the base of your tree coming back down?
I'm not entirely sure that I understand what you mean, but I'll take a stab at it. So abiogenesis is the study of how life potentially started, and there are several models for that. There's actually a website where you can see a lot of different tests that have been done in that area by Jack Zostak and his team. So they do a lot of experiments in this area. What we see, for instance, when we look at the fossil record, is you can see it, I guess, kind of going. Yeah, you can see it kind of going the other way, I guess. If you look at the lowest layers, you'll see these organisms that are less complex, and you can see over time as they develop into more complex ones, like dinoflagellates, which are these protists. The most primitive ones are on the bottom, and they get more complex as you rise through the strata. And the same with chordates, which are organisms with a notochord and pharyngeal gills and a postanal tail and a dorsal hollow nerve cord. And these guys, you see in the Cambrian, which is where they first appear, you have guys like Hycoichthyes, which are very primitive. They look kind of like a fish that someone didn't finish drawing, like no fins on the side, no tail flukes, things like that. And then as you go into the Ordovician, or as you rise through the Cambrian, you see these other chordates appear, which are more complex. You see conodonts, and then you get into the jawless fish, which appear in the Ordovician and are in there through the Silurian. And then the jawed fish arrive, and it just gets more complex as you go up.
Yeah,
if that's what you mean. If I missed the point, then
no,
I apologize.
I'll tell you when my point of confusion comes. I'll give you an easy example. Excuse me. I'll give you an easy example. If let's just say abiogenesis was from natural means, for the sake of the argument, and amino acids and RNA and everything came together and it produced life in its earliest form, whatever that may be. I understand we don't know what that is at the moment. From there, according to the evolutionists, it started to evolve and change into something different than its original form. Am I okay so far?
Whatever it was passing down genetic material that was varying in frequencies of its alleles over time, which so yes, I would.
Yeah,
it's not like that one organism was changing it. There was a population. It became a population that changed over time. So
yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. So in order for it in order for the theory to progress from the bottom up, in my thinking as a layman, you would need to have, instead of the experiments that are being conducted where it produces certain amino acids, etc., you would need that to happen on a multiple scale, all at the same time. Is that correct? So you know that
what you mean.
You know the old story of the Ken Torvine's muddy, what's he called it, primordial soup. You know,
okay.
And the lightning bolt comes down, bump, and it produces a bolt of electricity, and from there amino acids form and RNA and all these things. If they produced whatever they produced, the first product, the first life that was ever produced, I'm not even discussing that because I know that we're not at that stage. What we're saying is the first stage must have changed to become the second stage. Does that make sense? If it was a single celled amoeba, if it was whatever it was, it must have changed from phase 1 to phase 2.
Well, okay, so with abiogenesis, if you just look at the RNA theory or RNA hypothesis, RNA world hypothesis, it's not an organism in a sense. What you've got is you have these chemicals that are all naturally produced. You have amino acids, which are naturally produced. You have carbohydrates and lipids, and then the constituents of nucleic acids, which are nucleobases. These are produced naturally also, and so it also. So it's not necessarily that lightning had to strike.
No, I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah, right. So so these things, they came together. At least that is the hypothesis, that they came together. Nucleobases came together, and if you can form RNA self-catalyzes, or it auto-catalyzes, which means it speeds up its own production. Yeah. Which is what makes RNA so interesting. It's got these little guys called ribozymes. And so if they could be incorporated into a phospholipid coat, for instance, if you could get, because lipids, if you drop them in water, they form little bubbles.
Right.
Like phospholipid bubbles. Our skin is made of phospholipids. So if you can get some fats or lipids to trap a nucleic, or what would form a nucleic acid like RNA, you could get it trapped somewhere, and it could have, or it would have time to replicate and evolve. Then it could eventually become what we would consider an organism, and then I mean, this might not have happened with just one cell. There might have been a population of like proto cells that this was happening in. Yeah, or protobionts. Thank you, Savannah. And so this is hypothetical, but
No, no, I
it's
understand.
one potential way it could have happened.
But let's say it did happen. Let's go with the hypothesis that it did happen. This is where my confusion comes in. Once everything has joined together and created like the very, very, what can I say, the most basic life form in its earliest stage. From that stage, it had to progress to stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, stage 6, etc. Each time improving or each time developing into a creature more advanced than the first one. Would you agree?
Depends on what you mean by advanced. I mean, some organisms lose parts as they become more advanced or more specialized. Parasites, for instance, do. I mean, they're varying in allele frequency over time. They're reproducing, and they would have ultimately, as the hypothesis goes, have become the first life forms, the first organisms, and then it would have split into the 3 domains thereafter: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya.
Now, this is what interests me. This is the bit that I'm talking about. This is what made the split, or how do we account for the split?
What do you mean? Which split?
You said it split into 3 different stages.
No, 3 different domains.
Domains. Yeah.
Bacteria were the first organisms to appear.
Yeah.
They are prokaryotes. They don't have a cell. They don't have not a cell. They don't have a nucleus. They do have cells. Yes, they were. As they evolved, they became better at surviving, and
But just go back one stage, please, Jackson. What I'm saying is,
and so
we had one. We had one, and then the one split to 3 domains. This is the
not exactly.
Yeah, this is what I'm interested.
Not exactly. So like I said, this is what might have happened. Was it might have been a population of them? There might have been a few different lipid bubbles that captured RNA, and then they evolved over time. But the 3 domains thing came about a long time later. So the origin of life is put somewhere around 3.8 to 4 billion years ago, because there was this period called late heavy bombardment, which there were a whole bunch of meteorites hitting planet Earth, which were depositing a bunch of different chemicals, and scientists think, okay, well, maybe that's what helped fuel life. So the 3 domains thing. So bacteria, the first domain to appear. Archaea also appeared, maybe from, or probably not from bacteria, but they also appeared, and it might have just been a matter of different placement. There might have been the ones that would eventually become archaea might have just been living in a different area by some accident, some happenstance. Might have been a wave that pushed them to a new area, and so they became, those ones that were pushed to the new area became archaea, while the ones that were staying in the same area became bacteria. That's just allopatric speciation. Eukaryotes, on the other hand, the organisms with a nucleus in their cell, they came along essentially from the archaeans. They developed from the archaeans through endosymbiosis at one point or another, which was much later. Much time had passed after the bacteria and the archaeans had split.
Yeah. Did
any of that make sense?
No, a little, obviously. So a lot of it's over my head, I admit. But the basic principle, this is my major confusion with evolution. This is why I go back to this point. It's the origins, and I know we don't know it now, so I'm not trying to pinpoint anybody to know the origins. Science will eventually find in the future what the origins are. It's this split that interests me. For example, by the way, Jackson, I'm an old man. I have grey hair. I like to garden. Right? I like to do my gardening. I have slugs. My garden is infested with slugs. Now I have a slug and a human being. Now, when I look at a slug and a human being, I'm saying, if these are coming from the same original source, I want to know how I end up with a slug and a human being. This is my confusion. I can see if you work your way from the top of the tree backwards, but I can't see if you start at the bottom of the tree and work your way upwards.
So this is what happens. This is something we observe a lot. This is just at a fundamental level, the ancestor of, or the ancestor that would eventually become humans, and the ancestor that would eventually, or give rise to humans, the ancestor that would eventually give rise to slugs, came from the same place. So if you look at cichlids, for instance, there's a lot of research with cichlids in Africa, in African lakes like Malawi, Tanganyika, and Victoria. So cichlids speciate really quickly. And what they study is that of these populations, they're giving rise to a whole lot of different species of cichlids. So ultimately, the cichlids all came from the same place. They came from the same population. But these populations split over time, and the divide between them is growing, which is what happens in speciation. They go their own separate ways. And so for humans and slugs, we share a common ancestor. We're both in this group called Nephrozoa because we're both bilaterians. But our common ancestor with slugs lived about 560 million years ago, which was Precambrian, late Precambrian. And we know that because we know that slugs aren't on our side of the fence, first of all, because we develop differently embryonically. Slugs are protostomes and we're deuterostomes. That means when slugs develop, the mouth forms before their anus. For deuterostomes, it's the opposite. And so we can see that first, which is why we know they're not on our side of the fence. We also look at the genetics, and we can see that our common ancestor with them based on mutation rates and studying the genetics of other organisms, and also looking at the fossils, we can see that all these things are cross-corroborating, and so we can see that our common ancestor lived around this time. I mean, we also share a common ancestor with fish. We share a common ancestor with chimps also. There's an interesting website called it's like EvoGenio, I think, where you can see what a tentative common ancestor between these organisms look like. I have some issues with the website, but for the most part, it's pretty interesting. And so our common ancestor with chimps looks a lot more like us than our common ancestor with trout does, or with slugs does. And so it's just a matter of these changes accruing over time, resulting in what we see today.
Yeah. For me, I'll be honest with you. I admire your brain, Jackson. For me, it just sounds crazy. I'll be honest with you.
It sounds crazy?
No, but that's because, to be honest, that's because I'm not as intelligent to study in the same way as you are. You've explained it very well, and I'm not denying what you're saying is true. I'm just saying, from somebody who hasn't put the same study in, I'm trying to follow along as best I can.
Okay.
But I do understand you've done an awful lot of study, which I have to respect that for. I haven't got that same amount of study, so I'm listening as a layperson, trying to understand. But as I'm listening to understand, it doesn't seem to make logical sense to me. But I have to accept that that's because I'm not studied in the subject. That's not anything to say against you.
Well, so that was why I brought up the cichlids, because this is what speciation is, the first step in this process. So what happens is you've got do it.
Sorry, Jackson. No, see, the first step in the process, this is what I was trying to get to, goes way back. It's the abiogenesis, the amino acids, the RNA all come together and form the very first life form. All the very first life forms are. Then they split into 3 domains.
Well,
this is the part
kind of
I'm stuck at. Yeah. This is the bit I'm stuck at.
Okay, so that's why I brought up cichlids. So what happens is with more complex organisms, what happens is you have these things called prezygotic and postzygotic barriers that prevent the mating of 2 different organisms, which is why if a horse mates with a donkey, it's going to produce a mule, which is infertile, for the most
Yeah.
part. Large majority of cases, they're infertile mules. So, so for bacteria, so for prokaryotes, you have things like horizontal gene transfer, and it's a lot. There's a lot of weird stuff that goes on the prokaryotic level. A lot of weird, complicated things. Too complicated for me, and so the split between bacteria and archaea, I don't know if the. I don't think so. I don't know if the consensus is that archaeans evolved out of bacteria. I don't think so, but I'd have to look it up.
No,
But the
no,
point
honestly,
is, sorry, it's just that the point is that there were some differences that accrued in these two different populations, which after there are differences in populations, and they split, and over time these differences just built up, causing the divide to grow ever deeper.
yeah. That's okay. Honestly, Jackson, you've done a fantastic job trying to help me to understand. It's not you, it's me that's trying to grasp. Just final thing. I don't want to keep you all night.
Oh, that's all right. It's the middle of the day here.
Oh, right. These earliest forms. Let's assume that the amino acids and RNA and all these all join together, create the earliest form. At this point, did they have DNA? Or is the hypothesis that they had? Sorry, the hypothesis that they had DNA and genes and.
Yes, all modern organisms have DNA.
Right.
Not all of them have all the constituent parts of DNA. Like bacteria or prokaryotes don't have introns, for instance, which are these little parts in our DNA that separate the exons, the parts that get this is the parts with the protein coding genes. The introns like separate them so they don't get transcribed and become proteins. So yeah, I mean there are differences. They don't have all the constituent parts, but yes, bacteria, archaeans, and eukaryotes all have DNA. Even some viruses have DNA.
And from the scientific point of view, what did the DNA come from? Do we know where it came from, or is it was there and then now we've learned to study
the RNA? Oh, sorry. The RNA hypothesis says that DNA arose, or probably arose, from RNA, because RNA self-catalyzes and DNA requires enzymes to catalyze.
Right.
Not to catalyze. It auto-catalyzes its own replication, but DNA cannot. So DNA requires enzymes to replicate. So yes, we think RNA came first.
RNA came first, then DNA, and then DNA has, my understanding, it's a code. The code, and then the code. Are we saying that the code got? Excuse me if I ask stupid questions. I don't have access to a scientist very often, so
no, I don't think they're stupid questions.
If in my mind, a human being is more complex than a fish. In my mind, maybe biologically it is or not.
No, I wouldn't say so. We are both as well. It depends on what you mean by complex. We are both equally derived from our common ancestor. Fish have had, or the trout, for instance, has had just as much time to evolve as we have.
I mean, the DNA code. Is the DNA code more complex for you? You know, I hear the stories where they say the DNA code is for a human being is so many billion digits. Is that the same for a slug or a snail
So I just want to raise the issue. I'm very wary of calling DNA a code because I mean, you have to remember, DNA is just chemicals. It's just a bunch of carbon and phosphorus and oxygen and hydrogen. It's just these chains, and so it's not a code like ones and zeros on a computer. It's just chemical. It's just all these chemicals coming together. There's a phosphate backbone. The nitrogenous base. It's all just chemicals. The whole thing is just atoms of chemicals. And so with regard to that, like I said, we are just as derived from our common ancestor with trout as trout are. But rice, for instance, have way more genes than we do.
Wow.
They have
Yeah,
like a single, not grain, or it's not a grain. What is it called? Is it a grain? You know, like a single rice.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. It
We'll call
has.
it.
Yeah, I guess we can just call it a grain for these purposes. It has way more genes in that single grain of rice than we have.
Right.
Like way more genes.
Right. Well, I'll have to do some more study. You've answered most of the questions that I was intrigued by. That's always been the case for me. Is I look bottom up, because obviously I'm starting from a point that God created everything. So I start at the bottom and work my way up, and the confusion is the early stages. But you've given me a lot to go away and study. But I might be asking further questions.
Okay.
Listen.
I readily welcome questions so long as I can answer them.
That's okay. Jackson, thank you so much for your time, by the way. I do appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much for coming on today.
That's okay, no problem at all. Best wishes to you.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone else watching.
Yes, thank you for everyone. Okay. Thanks,
All
Jackson.
right. Yep, thank you.
Okay. All right, bye-bye now.
Bye.